I'm ready for my close-up now, Mr. DeMille.
Okay, here we go. Howard, thanks so much for joining me today.
Well, thanks for the interview, David.
It's always enjoyable to sit together and talk with you. And congratulations on your new book, Affect, Representation, and Language, Between the Silence and the Cry.
Yeah.
I know you have a book launch coming up soon, October 30th.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful book.
Thank you.
And so good luck on the book launch. I know you have some great people on it with you, from international folks talking with you about the book and reacting to it. So I think it's going to be a wonderful program. Okay, so I'm going to ask the toughest question right up front because, you know, we have limited time today. So this is a question a lot of people have been wondering about and asking me about. So let's get right to it.
Yeah.
Is it true that the B in Howard B. Levine stands for beyond? Is that true? Yes or no?
When I was in college, which was 60 to 64, Lyndon Johnson was president.
Okay, yeah.
And so one of my friends used to call me Baines. But if it stands for anything, it really should stand for Boris, because Hal Boris was the guy who introduced me to Beyond's work.
Okay. We want to hear about this now.
Yeah, he's at the root of this. When I was a first-year psychiatric resident at New England Medical Center, we had a very special inpatient service. It was an open ward. There were 10 patients. There were 5 psychiatric residents. We each had 2 patients each, and we saw them individually 6 days a week.
Oh, wow.
And there was a 5-day-a-week inpatient group.
Mm-hmm.
And because I had spent some time in the psychiatry department at Tufts in New England Medical Center when I was a medical student, and the first-year residents in the year that I began my residency were the ones who were supposed to lead the group. They knew me, so they asked me to do the first 3 months of leading that inpatient group. Mm. And Hal was my supervisor.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave me experience in groups to lead.
Yeah.
And he taught me how to lead that group from a Beyond Tavistock group as a whole perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Then when I was a third-year resident, they changed the model. Rather than having a rotation of first-year residents lead the group, they wanted to have someone more experienced lead the group for the entire year. Mm. They asked me to do it.
That was you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I said that I would do it if Hal would continue to supervise. So they gave me 2 hours a week of supervision with him.
Oh, what a gift.
Yeah.
He was so underappreciated, I think.
And attention and interpretation had just come out.
Oh.
So we read attention and interpretation together.
Oh, what a wonderful introduction.
So this was my introduction to Beyond.
Yeah.
Then the next year, when I finished my residency, I started psychoanalytic training at BIPSI, which was very heavily ego-psychological.
Those two don't go together so well.
They don't. I had to put aside all of my Beyond thinking, to whatever limited and preliminary extent it was there, because of the cognitive dissonance, and because you couldn't talk Beyond to your instructors because they didn't understand, and it was too different from what they were thinking and what they felt psychoanalysis was.
Can I just ask, so Hal Boris was not part of BIPSI, is that correct?
He was never part of BIPSI.
So he didn't bring that thinking into BIPSI.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. But he was part of the psychiatry department at Tufts. And then after I finished my residency, at some point, he left Tufts and went to Cambridge Hospital. But I came, after I graduated from psychoanalytic training at BIPSI, I came back to Beyond because Larry Brown and I had started the Klein Study Group at MIP.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And we began to teach Bion. And Larry came up with the idea that we should read not experience groups, learning from experience
Yeah.
with the group. And so that plunged me back into Bion. And from there, the idea that we would run the BGPS would run the Bion conference that we put on in, I think it was 2009.
Wonderful conference. Great experience.
Yeah, just launched me back into that, and there was, I also had a clinical need for it because I had a practice with non-neurotic patients, or many patients who had non-neurotic problems in addition to problems with neurosis. And my understanding of what I was taught about classical psychoanalysis from an ego-psychological perspective just didn't work.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the book you're referring to, you know, Between the Silence and the Cry, it's the result of my having to go off in search of other ideas, other authors, other ways of coming back and reading and understanding Freud that would help me to get a purchase in the work with these other patients.
Yeah. Your patients got you into it.
Sure.
More deeply.
Yeah. As they do for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to go back to the beginning when you first read Bion.
Yeah.
So many people, and I will count myself among them, the first time they encounter Bion, reading Bion, let's just say they have a catastrophic reaction. Can you remember what it was first like?
It took me years to understand Bion and make use of it and make sense of it and get beyond the strangeness and the idiosyncrasies of the language. But you know, I had the good fortune to be reading Bion with someone else, which is always helpful.
Big help.
And Hal was someone else who really knew Bion, both knew Bion's work and also knew Bion, because Bion was in California then.
Oh, he personally knew Bion?
Yeah, and Hal used to go out to California and have consultations with him and talk with him. I don't know whether he was also in treatment with him, but they had a relationship. And when the Bion conference took place in Boston, I helped Francesca, Bion's second wife, reconnect with Hal's second wife, because they had been friends and they had lost contact. Francesca came to Boston, as you remember, and I put her back in touch with Hal's wife. Hal had passed on at that point. But so he and Bion had a relationship, a collegial working relationship of one sort or another.
What a wonderful way to learn. One step removed.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's fabulous. Yeah.
Hal was sometimes as enigmatic as Bion was, and that could be frustrating as hell. But I'm really grateful to him for having introduced me to Bion's work and giving me a place to stand, to think outside the box of what was the standard formulation that was being taught at the time. Because I think no matter where that is theoretically in the theoretical spectrum, that's probably a good thing to have, so that you're not caught up in one perspective or one dominant ideology and caught in some kind of theoretical silo, that you're always in dialogue with different parts of psychoanalytic thinking, different parts of your own thinking.
So now you also had relationships with Hannah Siegel, I believe.
Yes.
And also with Priscilla Ross.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
And you know a lot of people in the British London Kleinian world.
Yeah.
did you find that helped you understand beyond
No.
in interesting ways? No.
No, it helped me understand psychoanalysis. But,
Oh, okay.
but not
Not
beyond.
Okay, yeah.
I met Hannah Siegel, Hanka as she was known.
Hanka, okay.
Yeah, I met Hanka because I was interested in John Mack's work on the psychology of the nuclear threat.
Mm-hmm.
And Hanka was very concerned about the prospects of nuclear war and started something called the International Psychoanalysts for the Prevention of Nuclear War.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I had already met Prissy Roth through Susie, my ex-wife, because they had gone to college together.
Oh, that's how that connection came.
Yeah. And Prissy introduced me to Hanka and Mo Laufer, who were the two leaders of IPPNW, and Hanka asked me to become the North American representative for IPPNW. At the same time, I was program chair at BIPSI,
Oh.
and I decided that I would put together a conference on the psychology of the nuclear threat. So I had John Mack, I had Vanek Volkin, I had Mort Ostow from New York, I had Henry Parents from Philadelphia, I had Martin Vong from New York, and I invited Hannah Siegel.
Oh.
Hanka's appearance at BIPS, and I said to her, look, as long as you're coming, give a scientific paper too. This was the first time, maybe the first time ever, that a Kleinian had appeared at BIPSI.
And what year is this roughly?
I think it was 86.
86, okay.
Yeah. It was just about the time that American psychoanalysis was about to open up to accepting and being interested in Kleinian thinking. Hanka was delighted because her youngest son, Gabe, was a graduate student in linguistics at MIT, studying with Chomsky and Roman Jakobson.
Yeah.
And so she had an opportunity to come to Boston to visit her son. And
worked out all around.
It worked out all around. The paper she gave at BIPSI was at the Psychology of the Nuclear Threat Conference, which later became a book that we edited. That paper was "Silence is the Real Crime," which is a rather famous paper of hers. The paper she gave at BIPSI was "The Clinical Usefulness of the Death Instinct." It was standing room only.
Oh.
And it was a real occasion because, she was quite a figure already in international psychoanalysis, but someone whose work was never taught or discussed at BIPSI at that time.
Yeah.
Through Hanka, I met Betty Joseph and so many others, Ron Britton, John Steiner, Michael Feldman, Eric Brendan, etc.
So this is something that I really know about you and know you're really tremendously connected internationally.
Yeah.
And this was one leg of it, but there's another really important leg. Speaking of introducing, because I know that you've been very instrumental in introducing post-Bionian Italian field theory into not only Boston but I think North America. And tell us a little bit about how that came about.
Sure, that's another story. I can't remember if I was a reader for the International Journal or already on the editorial board, but one day I was asked to review a paper, and it was by
this guy,
some guy. It was Nino Ferro's paper that was later published. It was on clinical applications of Bion.
Great paper.
And I read this paper, and I was just blown away. I thought it was a terrific paper. it made so much sense to me about how Leon's work was informing a clinical theory and how the clinical theory could work.
Yeah.
And I was just delighted with it. And I happened to be talking to one of my friends, to Nachi Piazansky.
Yeah.
And I said to her, "Did you ever hear of this Italian guy named Leon? Named Ferro?" And she said to me, "I just happened to review his book, his first book, which was on child analysis. He's great." She said, "I want to talk to him." And I said to her, and this, this reveals my naivete. I said to her, "You can do that?" She said, "Sure." And I thought, shit, I'm going to write to him.
Yeah.
And I wrote to him, and I said, "I've just read your paper. I thought it was great. If you ever have the occasion to come to the United States, please let me know. I'd love to talk with you." He wrote back, he said, "In fact, I've been invited to come to the AFSA meetings in New York."
Yeah.
So we arranged to have coffee together.
So this is somewhere in the mid 2000s?
No, it's early 2000s.
Early 2000s. Okay. Yeah.
We arranged to have coffee together. We meet for coffee at 11 o'clock. Nino could hardly speak English at that point. I speak no Italian, of course.
Yeah.
Nino is fluent in French. I have, a year or two of college French, but I haven't used it in a million years.
Well, it sounds like a perfect setup for a conversation. Then.
Right. We talked together for almost 3 hours. A lot of hand gestures.
Yeah.
A lot of going back and forth between languages. A lot of struggling for words.
Yeah.
But we talked and talked and talked.
Found a way. Yeah.
And we really connected and communicated. And then I managed to invite him to Boston a couple of times. I think the first time was when Chris Lovett's first wife died. There was a memorial service for her. She had been a candidate at Pine.
Yeah.
Pine put on a memorial service for her, a clinical conference in her memory, and asked Chris who they might invite. And Chris was already involved with Larry and I in the Klein Leon Study Group, and we all came up with the idea that we should invite Nino.
Oh.
So that was Nino's first appearance in Boston, and I think it was his first institute or society appearance outside of the APSA show in the United States. And then, of course, we had him at the International Beyond Conference. We had him do BGPS, and through Nino, I spoke in Pavia, which is his hometown, and it started a relationship between me and Nino and his colleagues and my colleagues, BGPS in Pavia, and it eventuated, among other things, in the recent book that we did, the post-Bionian field theory of Antonino Ferro.
Wonderful book also, which I'm happy to be part of.
Right, and you wrote a wonderful chapter for it.
This is your interview, not mine. We have about 5 minutes left. I want to ask you about another important area, because you're known for a lot of different, you've got your foot in a lot of different worlds, but I think you're really well known for your work in unrepresented mental states,
right,
in particular. So, can you say a little bit about how did you get into that along with Dominique Scarfoni and Gail Reed?
Wow. Well,
It's a big question for not much time, I know.
Yeah. Gail and I have known each other forever. I first met her when we were both very young. She gave a paper at the American Psychoanalytic Association, and I was the discussant. And then we became friends, and when she came up with the idea of deciding to form a national international clinical study group,
Yeah.
I was one of the first people she asked to join, and that group has been going on for, I don't know, over 35 years now. I met Dominique when I was on the program committee of the American Psychoanalytic Association. I was a very young analyst. I had been on that program committee for a year or two, and there was a representative that would come each year from Canada who would sit in as a guest.
Yeah.
And one day, this new guy came, and he didn't know anybody. It turned out to be Jacques Mauger. He didn't know anybody, so at the break, I went up to him, introduced myself, and said to him, "Do you have plans? Would you like to go to lunch?"
Mm-hmm.
And so I met Jacques. We went to lunch. We became friends, and he was a very close friend and colleague with Dominique. They were on the board of a journal called Trans. This was before trans meant something that now means today in terms of gender orientation. It was about translation in psychoanalysis, and psychoanalysis as translation, as in Laplanche.
Yep.
Dominique was the editor-in-chief. Jacques was one of the board members. They wanted to do a journal issue on translation of a psychoanalytic paper from English to French.
Mm-hmm.
So they asked me if I would write a paper.
Mm-hmm.
So I did. And they translated it, and then they published the they published the French version, I think, and they published a number of commentaries about the process and complexities of translation. So this was all in French.
Yeah.
So I knew Dominique through that process, although I hadn't met him yet. And then I encountered him again at a conference in Montreal on confidentiality a few years later. I heard him speak and I thought he was brilliant. So I renewed my acquaintance with him. We started a friendship, and he eventually joined the Gail Reed study group.
Yeah.
So we worked together in that group for, I don't know, half a dozen years or more.
And the unrepresented idea came out of that work with the...
It came, Gail and Frank Beaudry started a discussion group at the American Psychoanalytic Association on French psychoanalysis.
Right.
They got me reading Andre Green.
Okay.
And I happened to pick up the Botella's book on psychic figurability.
Wonderful book, yeah.
And I began to read that book, and I realized that there was something there that really put all of this stuff together. Because I think that the whole issue of unrepresented states is the confluence of Freud, first of all, Freud, Green, Bion, and Winnicott, and Lacan. I mean, those are the great influences on Andre Green.
Yeah.
And through all of that, I began to put things together for myself in a way.
Yeah. It's become such an incredibly important area right now.
Yeah.
I have one last question.
Yeah.
I stopped counting how many articles and books you have. I didn't even try to count how many appearances, seminars, lectures, and stuff you have. You have just been so productive.
There are actually 8 of me.
8 of you, yeah. Well, it seems to me COVID has made you even more productive.
Yeah, I've been locked up in this place, unable to travel, unable to see colleagues and friends in person, and so I turned my house into a monk's cell.
Yeah. So that worked. So last question: is it true that you're nuclear powered? Howard,
I wish.
Thank you so much
for
the
thank
chat
you
today, and for
thank
all
you,
that
David.
you've contributed to colleagues and to our wonderful profession.
Thank you, but it's people like you who make it worthwhile. You know, to go through this business and this journey with friends and colleagues like you, like Dolan, like the friends of BGPS, like the friends in the Gail Reed Study Group, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's priceless.
Makes it so rich.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank
All right.
you.
So we'll end here. I just